Derek Leuer is the state traffic safety engineer for the Minnesota Department of Transportation in the Office of Traffic Engineering. Turn this on. He has been responsible for the development of the district and local county road safety plans, assisting in statewide traffic safety plan efforts, and providing technical assistance to state, county, and local agencies. Derek has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from North Dakota State University and a master's in infrastructure systems engineering from the University of Minnesota. He is a registered professional engineer in Minnesota. Please welcome Derek.
Do I need to use the microphone, or can everybody hear me? With that, it's helpful with my. All right, I'll move this a little closer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so my first confession is I did the bulk of this presentation yesterday. I made it with a 3-year-old on my chest who had influenza. So if I skip around and I don't know what I put down, that's why. So be patient with me. Thank you. So yeah, Jeremy approached me about a month ago or so and asked me if I had any interesting topics to talk about for ITE, and I kind of said, not really. But then I said, well, we do have the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and it's just about done, and I figured that's a good, high-level document that would be of interest to this group. So I threw that out, and Jeremy thought it sounded like a good idea. So hence why I waited till yesterday to do the presentation. So the 2020 to the 2024 Strategic Highway Safety Plan. So what is the Strategic Highway Safety Plan? I'll probably just use the acronym SHSP from here on out. So the SHSP, the overarching goal of this document, can you guys still hear me in the back, or do I need to be like really close to the microphone? Good either way, okay. So the goal, the SHSP is really to set the direction to reduce fatalities and serious injuries for all users on all roadways across the state. It recognizes this complicated relationship that we have between crash types and promotes strategic partnerships to impact safety. And the whole reason for that phrase I have right there is that there is no one group, there is no one agency that can tackle these problems on their own. We as the Minnesota Department of Transportation cannot do it all. Hennepin County can't do it all. St. Louis County can't do it all. The State Patrol can't do it all. We really recognize that in order to reduce these fatal and serious injury crashes, we really all need to work together, and we all need to come together to solve these problems. Another big part of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and this is actually written in federal statute, it needs to be informed by data. It needs to be a data-driven process, is the words they use. So we really need to rely on the crash data to help set the direction of where we need to go. You also need to provide input from traffic safety professionals and advocates from many disciplines. So from engineers, enforcement, EMS, education, those 4 E's that I'll probably get into. But you need to kind of touch all 4 of those and make sure you're incorporating all 4 of those groups within the document. And the last and probably the most fun part of all this is it's required by federal law, and it needs to be updated every 5 years. So it's kind of a check the box requirement, is that in order for us to spend any of our highway safety improvement program money, we need to have a strategic highway safety plan in place to be able to set the direction of how we want to spend those dollars. So what's included in this update? I think this is our 4th or 5th go around of the strategic highway safety plan. Back in 2007, it was called the Comprehensive Highway Improvement Program, or it's had a couple of different names over the years. Over time, the feds have settled on the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is what they'd like to see it called. So kind of the first part of all this is analyze your data. Take your crash data and figure out what are the largest trends, what are the biggest categories, and break those out. That's that data-driven piece. Make sure that what we're targeting, what we're trying to do, makes sense within the data itself. Next, consult with our traffic safety professionals and advocates. So those who are in the know, those who work in this every day, make sure we talk with them, make sure they're consulted. Next, prioritize. You're going to hear the word prioritize a lot probably today, but really help to set what are the biggest areas, what are the biggest things that we can influence, what are those, and how do we go after them. The next part, this is kind of newer, I'll say, is this idea of action-oriented strategies. Is that we want to, within the SHSP, as I said, it could be a document where we just check the box and we're done, where we say, yeah, we got the Strategic Highway Safety Plan and here it sits out in the internet and we don't do anything with it. And to be honest, that's been kind of the history of the document. Is we put a lot of effort into it and it would kind of just become a document that would sit out there and not really be done. Nothing would be done with it. The goal with this go around was really, let's have some specific strategies, some specific tactics that we identify and that we go after, and that we try to target these things year by year. And then as part of that, once we have an action-oriented strategy, is identify who's going to be in charge of that strategy. Have some accountability. Who is going to be the specific person who's going to go after that action-oriented strategy? And then, user-friendly. Make sure we develop a user-friendly plan, something that everybody can use and enjoy and have fun with every day. So the timeline, where are we? This is kind of a good timely meeting, actually, I'll say. So step one, as we said, was analyze the crash data. We were doing this probably close to a year and a half ago was when all this started. Next was gather input. So every spring we have what's called our regional Towards Zero Death conferences. There's 8 of them across the state. Every corner of the state has one. Within those, we go out to those and we'd actually talk to everybody at those conferences and say, what are your priorities? What do you see as the biggest issues? And try to identify those and actually have them do some prioritization exercises, help us identify what do we need to look at. The next part was summarize those strategies, summarize those action plans. That was kind of done this last fall here. And now we're kind of into this finalize the plan. And actually right now the plan is actually out there in draft format and we are looking for comments. So I'll provide the link at the end, but you guys can actually go and read through the Strategic Highway Safety Plan draft plan and provide us any comments. And by federal law, we have to address that comment. So if you want to say Derek was wearing a terrible shirt today, they're going to have to address that in some format. So don't put that, but you can if you really want. Kind of what I'll talk about today is, or kind of how the rest of the presentation will go is, I'm going to go through some of the statewide crash data, kind of what are those high-level what are those high-level categories? What was that stakeholder outreach? What did that look like? What are our focus area priorities? What do we, based on the crash data, based on what our stakeholders told us, what are the focus areas? What are we going to be really focusing on emphasizing over the next 5 years? And then what are some of these action-oriented strategies? I'm going to talk about those a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about federal performance measures, everybody's favorite thing, right? Numbers and charts and graphs. And to me, it's really interesting. I really like this stuff, but just go over it just so you guys have a sense of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. So, statewide data crash review. So, this is how the crash data looks out over the last 5 years. This dark blue line at the end, this is the number of fatalities we have had in the state of Minnesota every year. We don't go out to 2019 yet because it's still preliminary, but our preliminary number for 2019 at this time is 364 fatalities. A injuries, I'm not so quite sure, but you're probably all looking at this and you see this nice big blip right here, right? How we suddenly jumped to 1,992 in 2016. And there's a reason for that. Anybody have knowledge? Well, Mara, you don't count. Crash reporting system. So from 2015 to 2016, Minnesota implemented a new crash reporting system and a new crash report for officers to fill out. And one of the things that we've learned, and other states have learned this as well now, is that before in 2015, if an officer was at a really bad crash, the box they had to check for an A injury, a serious injury, was labeled incapacitating injury. Now, incapacitating injury sounds pretty serious, right? You're not going to check that box unless you see something really bad. What happened in 2016 was the new definition or the new descriptor that the officer could fill out was called suspected serious injury. So now that kind of opened it up. Officers were a lot more liberal to use this term than they were before. So we saw an 80% increase in the number of suspected serious injuries across the state. Really messes you up when you're trying to do federal reporting on your serious injuries across the state. We were one of the first states to do this. I believe Massachusetts was one of the first. They saw the same thing. A couple other states that have done this is kind of a federal definition thing, have seen the same thing, is that this kind of this looser definition, even though I'll say the definition is the same, the term to describe it seems a lot looser. So we're seeing a lot more, a big increase in that number, even though really on the ground, as far as we can tell, nothing's really changed. So the focus areas. Part of this data-driven. Okay, this is where the influenza kicks in. Okay. So we have 20 strategic focus areas, and if you look through these 20, I think back in 1992, AASHTO did a similar breakdown, and they had like 22 emphasis areas, is what they called them. And if you look through these, they're actually pretty similar. The overall focus areas, emphasis area, critical emphasis areas, whatever you want to call them, have really not changed too much over the last 25, 30 years. The major categories are still the major categories. So you can see here, you can kind of look at them, and I'll kind of get into some of these a little bit more. But these are how we break out our crash data. These are the focus areas of what we're trying to look at. I'll say these blue ones, these ones in blue over here, are probably the ones that are kind of, I'll say, squishy. We can't really assign numbers to them in any real fashion. Each of these other ones, there's a way we can assign numbers, we can categorize it, we can prioritize it. These ones way off to the right, they're kind of, like I said, squishy. It's hard to put numbers to them. It's hard to put real grit behind them. So once we got them all prioritized, the ones that we can assign numbers to, here's how these break out. Intersections is our #1 priority. 47% of all fatal and serious injury crashes have some relation to an intersection. And then the next one, single vehicle run off the road, 31%. The next one after that, impairment. Impairment is still a major issue across the state of Minnesota. 25% of all severe crashes have an impairment element to them. And then you can see as they kind of keep going down, there's ways to break down young drivers and unbelted occupants high. What's interesting is just within the last few years, from about 2013 or 2014, we saw a flip between younger and older drivers. Whereas younger drivers were always higher than older drivers are now higher than younger drivers. And that's probably a big thing to do with the demographics of the country and the state. But also there was that, what is called the graduated driver's license program. Anybody here have to go on the graduated driver's license program? There's nobody that young yet. All right, no one's that young yet. So that was something that just happened within the last few years. So essentially, if you were 16 and you got your driver's license, you had all these restrictions put on you. Like you could only have one person in the car, therefore the amount of dumbness in the car could only be so much, right? A couple other things. So there's all these rules now on younger drivers until they turn 18. So it's a way to get the driver more comfortable before they go and do something stupid. But you know, some of the ones I'll say was always interesting is like work zones and trains. Everybody sees that as these huge issues, and really when there's a train crash or there's a work zone crash, those types of things usually make the news, and they make the news in a big way, right? What's interesting is when you break down the data, especially on the fatal and serious injury side, it's a really small number compared to the bigger picture. And this is kind of where we get at that data-driven thing is that, you know, I think if you ask a lot of people, they say trains are a big issue with cars, and they are. But, you know, you look at that compared to intersections, it's, you know, where should we go? Go ahead, Scott.
Real quick, where does the strength driving fall? Is that kind of hidden in the numbers, or is it more like inattention?
Inattention would probably fall under distraction, and I'll get into that a little bit, because who here is surprised by the number 13%? Sounds low, right? Only 13%. Everybody I see driving is driving distracted these days, right? So I'll get into that a little bit. So here's, you know, we as engineers, this is how we like to see things. I like to see, you know, what are the big contributing factors. So from an engineering perspective, 50% of our severe crashes have an intersection component. 32% are that single vehicle run off the road where you leave the road and the vehicle either rolls over or hits a tree or hits a culvert or one of those types of things. And the other part, about 10 to 11%, is that head-on crashes where somebody crosses the center line and hits somebody coming in the other direction. So that's kind of, you know, right here, this is about 90% of our severe crashes have one of these three components in it. Kind of tells us where to go, right? Where should we be putting our emphasis on? This is kind of the behavior component of it. So, you know, impairment kind of hovered, you know, everything kind of coalesced around 2015, and then we had this new crash database, and suddenly everything got jumbled again. 28% is still impairment. Speed is 22%. Right there, that's 50% of our severe crashes have either an impairment or a speeding element to them. An unbelted occupant, that number is way down. That used to be 25% of our fatalities had an unbelted occupant. That's now down to 16%. And then, as you kind of alluded to with distraction, it's going down. Does that make sense? Does that seem weird? Yeah, it does. We're trying to explain it too. A big part is, this is kind of weird, because in 2016, we decided that in the new crash reporting system, we wanted to make sure we could take distraction and inattention more than we ever could before. So when an officer clicks the box for distraction, and actually a whole entire menu opens up so they can just say, the driver was distracted by shaving, the driver was eating cereal, the driver was watching television. all these things that the driver could now identify what were they distracted by, and it seemed to have the opposite effect. The officers are now not filling that out, and the reason why is we think a lot of law enforcement these days is being told, don't put anything in a report unless if you can back it up in court, which is unfortunate because by law, a crash record cannot be dragged into court. You cannot bring a crash report into court. But they're being told that, and they're this fear of being called out on the witness stand or not being able to back up what they're saying. The driver, we believe the officers are now hesitant to complete the distraction part. So that's why we see it going down in the numbers. This is what's reported to us. This is may or may not be actually what's happening, but that's kind of the reason behind that. So one of those things where it can be kind of counterintuitive. And I have to explain this every time I get this presentation because everybody looks at that and like, what is going on? You cannot tell me distraction is going down. And there's probably some truth to that. Distraction really isn't going down. People are probably getting better at hiding it. But this is what the data says. This is what's reported to us. The next one, driver status, kind of like I said, I think, what do we got here? Younger drivers and older drivers crossed about 2013, 2014. And now we're seeing more older drivers and younger drivers involved in fatal and serious injury crashes. This increase in unlicensed drivers, I don't have an explanation for that. And I've asked others and nobody seems to really have a good solid reason or good explanation for why that might be going up. Could be we're just better at tracking it now. We're better at tracking people who are unlicensed, or it gets reported better that if you have a driver's license and it gets flagged into the system, it's now reported as unlicensed. So even if your driver's license is expired and you get into a crash, it's actually flagged in the system now that you're an unlicensed driver, even though you just might have missed the what do you call it, going to get it rechecked at the end of the 4 years or 5 years. And here's kind of some of the other ones that a lot of people ask us about and kind of the more, bigger topics. Commercial vehicles, 14%. Motorcyclists is one of these ones that kind of seems to be going up, but overall with the serious injuries, it's kind of flat, but we see fatalities going up. So something's happening, but we know motorcyclists are an ongoing issue. But pedestrians, we see pedestrians going up. Pedestrians keep going up. We're trying to get a handle on that. Could be a lot of different reasons for that, but then over the last 10 years, bicyclists has remained kind of flat, right about that 2 to 3%. So that's kind of the data. So trending up, intersections, older drivers, pedestrians, speed, unlicensed drivers, and work zones. Even though work zones is small, we do see it going up. Somebody kind of had a theory on this one, was that when the recession hit in 2009, the state, the counties, the cities, a lot of people deferred work because they didn't have the money to do it, right? Well, times are a little bit better now. More money's coming in. We can get more things done. Everyone's catching up on that deferred maintenance. So there's a lot of work zones out there than there were before. And that's a theory I've heard. I don't have any way to back that up, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Things holding steady, bicyclists, commercial vehicles, lane departure, motorcycles, trains, those are all kind of been holding steady. Trending down, first one, inattention drivers, right? That's kind of counterintuitive. Lane departure, run off the road, that's going down. That's a good thing. We've been trying to emphasize that for the last 10, 15 years with the county road safety plans. Unbelted occupants and young drivers. Those are both probably hallmarks of major legislation that was passed 5 to 10 years ago. I think unbelted got passed in 2010 or 2011. Graduated driver's license 2012, 2013. So those things are probably leading to that downward trend that we've been seeing over the last few years. Any questions on data, crash data, trends? Go ahead, Danny.
I'm on a roundabout log in Kansas State, and I've also designed for traffic signals. Which camp, there's actually in the roundabout group that always points at that percentage of crashes at intersection. And they're trying to move to say, well, you shouldn't take the signals out to put in roundabouts. So I looked at the last year data I looked at in Minnesota 2016, and there were 24 fatalities at traffic signals, which was a small percentage of total intersection.
Right.
And so but it turns out Minnesota's doing a pretty good job on having a low number of fatalities in traffic signals compared to some other states. But I just think that number needs to be broken out a little bit better, rather than just say 49%. Right? Is it blowing stop signs or is it bad gap acceptance? When you don't have a signal.
Right. Yeah, that 49% is kind of a big number. It can mean a lot of things, right? And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, a big portion of those are rural 2-lane through stops scattered across the state. A lot of them are multi-lane rural through stop conditions as well. There's probably no one that's overwhelming of that 40 or 50%. Signals probably just gets a lot of attention because everyone's shocked to hear people get killed at signals. If anybody didn't hear Danny, it was more about, you know, how is that intersection break out across the state? And I know when we've looked at the rural through stop issue, how that's contributing. I think typically the numbers that we've been using is about 2/3 of people actually stop at the stop sign and pick a poor gap. About 1/3 of them are people actually below the stop sign, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And you know, a dead man tells no tales, so you can't really know if they knew it was there, or they intentionally ran or they unintentionally ran it. It's hard to know sometimes. But that's kind of the way it breaks out, is about 2/3 from what we can tell. People actively stop, they make a choice, and it's the wrong choice. But,
I have a
oh
question
yeah, go ahead.
about the attentive driver thing. Is there any sort of like education or anything, campaign or discussion about how to educate the police officers so that they fill that out correctly? So we can do it right?
If anybody didn't hear the question, it's about, is there an active effort to, enforce or educate enforcement to actually fill that out and get better data reported back? There is, I'll say we do try to tell law enforcement that message is trying to be spread. But if you think about the life of a police officer, filling out a crash report is a pretty small part of their job. And they're probably told overall, even if it's true in the crash report, they are being told just generally in reporting, don't say something in a report unless you know it's true, or you have some way to back it up. So even if we had a really good campaign to tell them, when you fill out a crash report, make sure you put down there and you don't have to worry about it. That's going to get lost in the other 1,000 messages they're told every day. I would say most of our officers maybe fill out a couple crash reports a year. I'd say State Patrol is probably the biggest one. They probably have the best data. They're probably the most accurate. But a lot of the crash reports we get are also from your local municipal police officer who, will go fill out a complaint for somebody shoplifting and then go do a crash report and then go to a domestic and then go to a drunk walking down the street. So, it's one of many tasks that they got to do. It's hard to get them to dedicate so much time on one specific thing. But there is an active effort, and we think, and, one of the first ones we talked about was this A idea, was that the A injuries went way up. There was kind of an active effort after that to tell the officers, like, that A injury really is something really severe. You shouldn't be using it unless you really have to. And for the last, I think even 2019 now, that number's down. So we think we're actually having some good effect on letting officers know, don't use that aid unless someone is really severely hurt. It's not a light box to click. And we think we're having some good effect with that as well. So stakeholder outreach. So who's involved? So this kind of helps develop how the plan was all put together. So the big one, we made the Strategic Highway Safety Plan Steering Committee. Was the same as our Towards Zero Death Leadership Team. And our Towards Zero Death Leadership Team is our state traffic engineer, so Brian Sorensen, for those of you who know Brian, and then Mike Hansen at the Department of Public Safety, who's the head of the Office of Traffic Safety. Those two are the chairs of the TZD leadership team, and then that's made up of various managers and leaders at both those departments and the Department of Health as well. So they're the ones who would make up the TZD leadership team. They also became the Strategic Highway Safety Plan leadership or steering committee as well. The SHSP project team, so we had a couple of consultants. I myself is on there. People from, I'll say technical experts from both the Department of Public Safety and Department of Transportation and the Department of Health are on that. And then traffic safety professionals and advocates. There's probably some cross mixing between those top three. And then also the general public. So we did have an online survey last summer where people could come in and fill out what they think is the most biggest priorities and what they see as issues. Along with those TZD workshops that we did last spring, the regional workshops. So that's kind of who was all involved so far. Where was I going with this one? Oh, so the 4 E's: engineering, education, enforcement, and EMS. And then now that 5th E, everyone. We try to get everyone involved. But so the lead agency is really MnDOT. We're the ones who are responsible for developing the plan. We're the ones who take the lead on it. But we get a lot of input from the Department of Public Safety and the Minnesota Department of Health, those regional workshops, and then through these groups, we try to reach out to cities, counties, state patrol, tribes, NPOs, other state agencies. You kind of see the list goes on and on there. So a lot of people have their toes in traffic safety, and we try to make sure we reach out to them and get their input as well. let's see, targeted stakeholder input. So first one, or one of the biggest ones, was try to figure out what those priorities were, and that's based on public perception as well. So in 2019 at our regional workshop, that's where we gathered that data. We had that public survey to come up with these action-oriented strategies. In 2018 at the TZB conference, the big statewide one, we gathered input from people. We actually had an open listening session where people would come sit down, tell us what they think is important, things that we have to get done. What do we need to work on? Let's hear from you. And we got a lot of good input from there. The regional workshops, there's the Minnesota Safety Council. They have a lot of good outreach to employers and a lot of other groups that they brought a lot to the table. Agency experts like myself. And then to set this 2025 goals for fatalities and injuries, we had a little exercise at the 2019 TZD statewide conference that tried to help set what that number should be. And all of that fed into input into the Strategic Highway Safety Plan Steering Committee, which ultimately helped inform this, this whole document and this whole process. So the focus areas, who's seen this before? Only one? Only Mike? Okay, so anyways, so this was actually developed back in 2014, and this is what we call the bullseye. So this was really, what are the biggest emphasis areas, how do they tie together, and what layer or what level of priority should they be given? So the center here, the gold as we called it, that is the level 1 priority. Those are the biggest focus areas that we need to focus on. At the heart of all this was what we call traffic safety and cultural awareness. And the idea behind that is that unless if we really change the culture, unless if we make people completely aware of traffic safety, a lot of these things that we're doing are going to be kind of runarounds. That we really have to, at the heart of all this, affect traffic safety. And I'll give an example, is that back in the 50s and 60s, it was really no big deal to go to a barbecue, drink 8 or 9 beers, get in your car and drive home. That was not considered bad. People did that all the time. Over decades of work and research and the information coming out of how bad it is to drink and drive, it is no longer culturally acceptable to drink and drive for the most part. I'm not going to say completely, but for the most part, you know, that's looked down upon. There's a lot of options out there. There's no reason why you need to have too many beers to get in the car and drive home anymore. You can kind of make the same impact of smoking. You know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, this room probably would have very likely been filled with smoke. As we all smoked, and I talked about here about how great traffic safety is, and I smoked 3 or 4 cigarettes while standing up here, and there's a billow of smoke above the whole room. That wasn't a big deal. Nobody would have thought about that. That's now culturally unacceptable. So the whole idea of the traffic safety culture is, can we change the culture to where not only do we not believe that traffic fatalities aren't acceptable, everybody believes traffic fatalities aren't acceptable, and we all have a part to play in that. But the big 6, I'll say the big 6 because they've been the big 6 for just about forever. Inattention driving, unbelted, speed, impairment, intersections, and lane departure. Those 6 constitute the vast majority of our fatal and serious injury crashes. These other ones, the next string out, are ones that are major contributors or have a major part to play, not as much as the big 6. And then these other ones are kind of ones that are still important, things that we need to work on, but they're just not the emphasis at the moment. So the thought was, once again, keep all the emphasis areas, but once again, identify those priorities. You know, look at emerging areas. What's next for making a difference? And, you know, a big thing that always comes up is connected autonomous vehicles. How is that going to play in? While not directly discussed in the SHSP, vehicle enhancements is one of those things that's always been a focus area or an emphasis area, but that'll probably become a bigger part as well. Bullseye, start pointing to help identify new framework. So once again, can we do something like the bullseye, but does it look different? You know, kind of give it a rebrand. And then this SHSP steering committee took all this input, all this data, and determined the new framework for what the 2020 to 2024 SHSP will look like. So, so from the workshops, these 8 workshops we had statewide, how did the crash data break down? So this is what people would say. We asked a group of people, what do you think is the most important area? And we had little Mentimeters and little things that people could click on and let us know what they think is the most important. And for the most part, people were pretty good at nailing what the data is telling us. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 5 of the top 6 appeared in the top 5. That people were pretty good at nailing inattention, intersections, lane departure, speeding. One that kind of popped up a little bit higher than what the data would tell us is pedestrians. People are more concerned probably now about pedestrians than they've ever been before. That kind of tells us too, that's an opportunity. That's an area we can go where we're probably starting to get more public support. But the data is telling us to go there as well. for the most part, it seemed that, our traffic safety professionals, the advocates were getting it. So, some that popped up a little higher, pedestrians, work zones, unlicensed. Some that were lower than what the data would tell us, lane departure, data management, which I said is kind of squishy, and then management systems, which once again, kind of squishy. It's hard to exactly put a figure on what that is. Focus area first. So frequency selected in top 3 statewide by focus area. So part of this was kind of similar survey. We asked, where do you rank these things, or what do you think is the highest? Again, once again, inattention, impairment, speed, all came to the top. We didn't ask about these things on the side because once again, we said they're kind of hard to put down in the data. So with the new plan, we kind of decided to regroup how we're going to call our core strategies, or I'll say our traffic safety strategies. The big first one was core. We called it core, I should say. The idea behind core is these are highly connected to other areas. Is that, if there's somebody who gets killed at an intersection, they're drunk, they're not paying attention, they're speeding, all those things are related. If you want to affect any single focus area, you got to focus on these big 6. So that's kind of what the core was. The next one was strategic. Things that we see are either on an increase. We need new strategies. We see demographic changes, that thing with the older drivers. The silver tsunami is coming, as we've all been told. How do we focus on that? And then, the social and political importance. Where does society as a whole see as important? Maybe the data is not exactly telling us that, but, inattention is one of those ones where society sees that as a really big deal. And can we strike it? Is that an opportunity for us? And then even geographic differences. And this gets a little complicated, but depending on where you are in the state, people see different priorities. And I mean, that makes sense. There's going to be a lot different to what people see as dangerous in the Twin Cities than what they see in Polk County, Minnesota. And that's just a part of the function of how the land use is and how people live up there or down here. And the other part of the strategic is they're going to have a specific strategy in the SHSP that was identified kind of early on. The next one is connected. So these are all things that kind of play into each part of these, but they don't have really a specific strategy or something tangible we can tie to them. And then these support solutions. So idea of like a crash database system is a support solution. We can't make big differences if we don't know what the difference, what's going on out there. That's why we need a crash database system. But it's hard to say how does a crash database system tie into a strategic highway safety plan, other than to know that it's important, right? So here's kind of the new bullseye, I'll call it. We have this idea of everything here is encompassed within the traffic safety culture. Is that in order if we want to impact traffic safety culture, or if we want to impact these things, we have to change traffic safety culture. So it's all tied to traffic safety culture. But the big ones, core, strategic, connected, and support, we try to put each priority area, each focus area into one of those buckets. And once again, the big 6 fall into core. Strategic are those ones that we see are upcoming or need emphasis. The connected are those ones that kind of tie into some of these other things, but they don't have a real specific high need. And then support solutions. How do those things help us with the other ones? Anybody have any questions before I get into action-oriented strategies? Super fun stuff, right? All right, so action-oriented strategies. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, there was, I'll say even the last strategic highway safety plan, we put a lot of work into it. We did a lot of data analysis. We got a lot of stakeholder feedback. We developed a really good comprehensive document. We put it out online, and there it's sat. Nobody used it. There was no real use for it. Even I'll say myself, as somebody who digs in traffic safety every day, seldom use the strategic highway safety plan. It just does not have a lot of value on a day-to-day document. And I'll say Will Stein with FHWA really pushed Minnesota this time around to say, why don't we make that document more worthwhile? Why don't we make that something that we can use? We put a lot of effort, we put a lot of resources, we put a lot of energy into developing this. Let's make it something actionable. Let's make it something that we can have some goals tied to. And that's kind of where this idea of action-oriented strategies came out. So we had small group activities at the workshops, those regional workshops, where we asked people, what would be some tangible things we could put in this plan that we could have people work on, and who would work on that, and what would be the goal at the end of the day. Each small group kind of identified 3 to 5 strategies that they thought were important. So depending on where you were and who's sitting at that table, you could get all sorts of things. I know I sat at one where I sat with a bunch of maintenance guys. And they were gung-ho about work zone safety. And, that makes sense. They're in a work zone every day. They're the ones out there clearing roads. it was really important to them, and they kind of came up with some good ideas of what they thought they could do, and those we wrote those down, and those got submitted. Now, you do that with, each of these workshops had about 100 people, so we'd have 20 to 30 groups at each of these workshops. You do this 8 times, you start to see trends emerge, and we start to see what people thought was both actionable and important at the same time. We compiled all these workshop strategies together, and then the TZD steering committee kind of went through those and they ranked them, and they kind of came up with about 34 action-oriented strategies that we should be working on as part of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And those were even broken out further into both 1 year and then eventual. So the ones that were highest priority, biggest things that we could do were called year 1 action-oriented strategies. And those are put into the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. I just went through that. So the format of these is that strategy. What is that high-level strategy, and how does that convey a broader objective? So, don't just throw out a strategy like, I'm going to get people to stop smoking. What good does that do? Well, what does that do? Is it ultimately help lower lung cancer, right? Get people to stop dying. So the high-level strategy, what are we trying to do, and what is that objective of what we're trying to do? And then it kind of gives us an action to accomplish the strategy. So one of the big ones that we had come out that I'm probably going to be in charge of is, let's deploy more alternative intersections. What does that look like? What is the goal of that? The goal of deploying alternative intersections is ultimately to reduce fatal crashes at intersections. And how do we do that? So, within there is a specific number of intersections. Within there is what are some of the alternatives that we can deploy. And then ultimately what is, a lot of those we've even looked at where we said, we're probably going to start doing ICE reports on those now so that we can start getting the exact intersection type identified as soon as possible. So here's kind of another one is, so the example, strategy 1, design roadways to reduce the frequency and severity of lane departure crashes. We know lane departure is a pretty big issue out there. So tactic 1, install rumble strips and mumble strips on center lines and edge of roads, especially along 2-lane roadways. Now, I'll say at MnDOT, this is policy. We just do this. So to me, that one's not real shocking, but for a lot of counties, this is good ammunition, right? This is things that we should be doing. Install improved pavement markings, such as wet reflective edge stripes and wider markings. And then kind of a big one that I'll say sometimes people at MnDOT have kind of felt this, is that we're kind of forgetting about clear zones, or we're not maintaining them as well as we used to. Let's get back to that. Maintain those clear zones to reduce obstructions. So those are, specific strategy and specific actions that we could do to get to that strategy. 2 types of priorities. Year 1, priority tactics. 35 tactics and 11 focus areas along with traffic safety culture. The goal is to start back up traffic safety culture again. It's kind of fallen by the wayside for the last couple of years. And then 5-year priority strategies. What are those things that we want to eventually get to? Is there a question or just stretching? Okay. I thought you were really excited about traffic safety. Or I'll say 5-year priority strategies. So the other parts of the SHSP, I'll say the little less glamorous parts, if any of it's glamorous, is this SHSP technical report. So the main part of the report that's out there right now is kind of what are those strategies, how do we get there, why are those the priority strategy areas, and what are those action plans? That's the part that's out there right now for comment. We also developed what's kind of called the technical report. And this is kind of, I'll say, behind the scenes. How do we get there? So, who was on the SHSP steering committee? The details about the crash data. So there's a lot of stuff about crash data that you can get in there. What was the description of the stakeholder engagement? So what did the surveys look like? Kind of a lot of the meat and potatoes that went into getting this thing ready. So if you really if you're really techie, or if you're in another state trying to figure out what Minnesota did, this is where you can go to figure out what that looks like. And this is a big part, we'll get into this, but the overview of the process to set the 2025 SHSP goal. That's kind of a lot of technical stuff in there, but how we got to the goal we got to, and I'll explain some of that. And then, once again, that whole federal requirement thing, there's a specific rule in the federal statute that says you have to talk about older drivers, pedestrians, older pedestrians, and then this old program that I've said is antiquated, but it's called the High Risk Rural Road Program. You have to specifically talk about these things within your Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And we wanted the Strategic Highway Safety Plan to be something that could kind of grab hold of you and grab attention. And we thought talking about High Risk Rural Road Program is not really a good way to get people's attention and command their respect. So that's why we carried it in the technical report. So it's still part of the SHSP, but it's not front and center. So implementation. I could get up here and talk all day long about crash data and strategic highway safety plans and county safety plans and district safety plans. And ICE reports and corridor studies and et cetera, road safety audits, all that. None of that is any good. That doesn't change anything. What changes things is implementation. Is when we go out there and we build things. When we build things, that's when we change things. So really, the strategies, tactics are the backbone to this plan. This is how we're going to implement things. This is how we're going to get things built, because this is how we're going to change things. Is ultimately when we build things and we change the infrastructure out there. So that's really the heart of the SHSP, and why we think this document is probably one of the best ones we've produced yet. And probably one of the best in the nation, is this idea of action and let's get stuff done. Let's not just talk, let's get things done. So how can your agency, how can you as a consultant, how can you as a city, how can you as a county implement the strategic highway safety plan? And this is where we need you. This is where we need our partners, because we at MnDOT alone cannot do this. Incorporate these relevant strategies and tactics into your plans, your corridor studies, your long range planning, all those things. Incorporate these strategies. Incorporate these strategy and tactics into your policies. Things, have to be a policy that you will do these things. Every rural county road, you will do rumble strips. Every horizontal curve in the rural area will have chevrons on it. Whatever it is, implement those things. Put them out there so that you almost have to do them, and you got to work your way out of doing them if you really have to. And then, the last part, on those individual projects, those individual programs, implement these types of things within those projects and programs. And that's how, we'll all get there together. And, probably last but not least, every part of the state now has what's called a Towards Zero Death coordinator. Now, this person's job is to go meet with cities, to meet with counties, to meet with EMS, to meet with patrol, to meet with law enforcement, and build this regional coalition to help reduce fatalities and serious injuries. So if you got questions, if you got ideas, if you got things that you think are worth implementing, talk to your regional TZD coordinator. They would love to talk with you and have a conversation. They may not have the answer, but they can probably point you in the right direction and get you going in where you need to go. So if anybody needs that contact, let me know. I got them. I don't have them here, but I can get you the right person. So any questions on action-oriented strategies? All right. So 2025 fatalities and serious injury goals. Oh, go ahead.
What are some of the actions from MnDOT to kind of prioritize safety over operations and stuff like that?
Right, and that's a tricky question. Can I defer? No, there's always an ongoing battle. I shouldn't say ongoing battle, but it's going to be hard with every project to identify how does safety trump over operations? How does safety trump over maintenance? But as a strategic highway safety plan, and what we kind of keep trying to do in the Office of Traffic Engineering is that if we want things to change, if we want things to get better, we're going to have to say we're going to prioritize safety over these things. That, safety may come at the expense of operations, and we as a state, we as a DOT should be willing to back that up. When you get calls of people saying that the timing on this signal sucks, we should be able to say we are doing this because we were sick of pedestrians getting killed at signals. Now that might go up the food chain all the way to the commissioner or the governor, but we as an agency should be ready to say that if we need to. And those are hard conversations. Those are hard discussions. When you're a driver driving the corridor every single day and you get caught at the same signal, it can be frustrating because you don't see a tangible benefit in the reduction of pedestrians getting hit. So there's always hard conversations, and it's not an easy discussion, but that's part of our job is to prioritize that. All right. Any other questions? Good question. I don't like when people ask questions I don't have a ready answer. I got to think about it. Don't do that. No. So 2025 fatalities and serious injury goals. So part of the federal requirement is that we now have these things called federal performance measures. Is that we as a state have to set what do we think is going to be the number of fatalities and number of serious injuries in a given year, and how are we going to get there? And if we don't, there are penalties for not getting there. So we have to set these goals going forward. And part of this, it's not actually required to be part of the strategic highway safety plan, but we decided to make it part of the strategic highway safety plan. So our long-term goal, as you guys have all heard, towards zero death, is ultimately to get to zero fatalities on our roadways. Now, that's a great goal. We should be working every day to get there, but we realize it's not going to happen all at once, and we have to set interim goals. So the goal that came out of the Towards Zero Death conference in 2019 here was 225 fatalities by 2025. And it's interesting how we got to that number. Not only is it catchy, 225 by 2025. When we did this poll exercise at the Towards Zero Death conference, if you look at what the average answer was, and you actually take out people actually said 0 because we said how many fatalities should there be in 2025. A good portion of people actually said 0, which is great. But you know, it's kind of one of those things you realize, well, that's probably not entirely achievable. If you take out those zeros, you actually ended up at like 225.4 was the average. So there seemed to be some, you know, at least some bias or at least some acceptance that 225 was a reasonable and I'll say, you know, gung-ho fun strategy to get to, that we should be trying to get there. No more than 225. I shouldn't say we're trying to kill 225 people in 2025. We don't want to kill any more than 225. I always got to be careful when I say that, because when you say like, well, our goal is only to kill 225 people in 2025, people kind of look at you like, I think you'll get there. And it's like, well, no, let me refer to that. So no more than 225. So, and then no more than 980 serious injuries by 2025. And I'll say, this is kind of a fun little side story, was our previous commissioner, Sue Mulvihill, on the last day of her career, and she once was the state traffic safety engineer herself, was sitting in the meeting where we were talking about this goal. And she said, I think 225 is ambitious, but I think you should be even more ambitious. And which is great to hear. But I always thought, how great is it on the last day of your career, you get to tell a whole bunch of people in a room that you're leaving that you guys should be more ambitious and you should try to strive even harder. And then you get to run off into the sunset and you're done. So I always thought that was a good little story. So what does this look like? If we want to get to 225 by 2025, here's what that trend line needs to look like. And we've set 225 for a couple other reasons too, is that the way the federal performance measure is set is based on a 5-year rolling average, which on any given year, 4 of your years are already predetermined because those numbers have been, the die is cast, the number's set. And what was happening was, as we got into, you know, so we set these numbers back in 2017, 2018, because of the prior years already setting the future trend line, we were getting some really wonky things in the data. And it's kind of hard to explain, but essentially we would be saying like, well, our federal performance measure for this year, we need to hit 385 as an example. But last year we had 381. So why is the federal performance measure target higher than last year's? And it has to do with this rolling average trend. It's, as I said, the die is cast. So we said, let's get rid of that nonsense. All we're doing is confusing people and making people upset because we're telling people higher numbers are acceptable. So with this 225 target now, the trend line is clear. The trend line and the rolling average needs to be going down every year consistently. And it looks ambitious. It's about a 40% decrease over the next 5 years, but we've done it before. It's happened before. So if it's happened in the past, why can't we do it again? And that's the goal, is that we want to hit 225 by 2025. Same with serious injuries. We want to see that number going down. Once again, numbers are acting real wonky with that 5-year average. Another part of the federal performance measure is the non-motorist fatal and serious injury crash totals. The goal there again is let's get that number going down and consistently going down. So the goal is 186, no more than 186 fatal or serious injury non-motorist crashes in 2025. So what happens if we don't get there? This is always one of the first questions that people say. If there's federal funding tied to this and we don't get there, what happens to MnDOT? What happens to the state of Minnesota? So the first thing that they're going to do if we don't get this, the Federal Highway Administration is going to tell us, Minnesota, you have to spend 100% of your HSIP funds, your Highway Safety Improvement Program dollars. You have to obligate 100% of those to safety projects. Now, the good news is we're already doing that. That has been determined. We are going to do that. We're going to do that without question. We're probably going to try to get well above 100% here over the next few years as well. So the worst thing the feds can do to us, they're already doing, or we're already doing. So not really a penalty, right? Do what you're supposed to do with your money. Not a big deal. The next part, and this is probably going to fall on me, is that if we don't hit our goal, we have to do what's called the Highway Safety Improvement Program Implementation Plan. Now, really, that sounds rough. That sounds, terrible, but it's really like writing a paragraph and saying, what are you going to do? Which to me is just like taking a few paragraphs about other things and recategorizing them and putting the header on it of HSFP implementation plan. So from our perspective, from my perspective, the worst thing the feds can do to us is not an issue. I'd rather have the lofty goal and have it, something ambitious, something that we can all strive for and work really hard towards. And if we don't get there, I'll do that, no problem. I'd rather see even if we get halfway there, even if we only get to 275, I would consider that such a success. I'll gladly write that any day of the week. So as far as we're concerned, the penalty's not there. We will take the penalty if we have to get there. It's not a financial reduction. It's not a loss in funding. It's just a little bit more work on our end to make sure that we're doing these things. So with that, our SHSP is out for comment. We have finished the draft. It's posted online. You can go to, I'll show the website next, but you can click this little link right here. Draft 2020-2024 Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan. You can go on it. You can look through it. And further down on the page, there's actually a little comment box. So you can read through it, put your name, put your email address, your contact information, your comment. I don't like Derek's shirt today. That'll come into us, and then by federal law, we have to address that comment in one format or another. So those comments are available till March 20th. So if you guys all want to go back home and have some awesome reading material, go ahead. Provide us comments. Anything we missed, anything we need to be thinking about, be a great time to add that comment now. There's the website up on top there. I can send that out to the group if you guys want. The actual draft SHSP, here's the address. So if you just want to go read the plan, but you don't want to have to worry about commenting, there's that. Or, the standard, just Google MN SHSP. It'll pop up to the top. Click the first link. You'll be there. So, all right. That's all I got. Does anybody have discussion items, questions, comments, ideas, suggestions for a better shirt color? Anything? Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, the NCITE Geometrics Committee is going to meet on March 11th or also, we are going to talk about alternative intersections.
Yeah, great.
We got the date for it.
Yeah, a lot of our alternative intersections, roundabouts and RCRs are still performing amazingly. We just ran the numbers the other day, and I'll say we looked at signalized intersections versus roundabouts. And we're seeing that for pedestrians and bicyclists, we're seeing about a 60% reduction at roundabouts versus signals. So I want to get that written up and out there. But I thought that, even as I kind of started crunching through the numbers, I'm like, this is even better than what you would think. So it was pretty amazing. So overall performing really well.
That was compared to signals or compared to the intersection before?
Compared to signals. So a comparison group of signals versus roundabouts. Yep. Any other questions? Thoughts? All right. Well, with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeremy. Thank you.